The Book, an action-adventure short story by G.B. Strickland. Dr. Wallace Jones squinted through the mist and fog. He could barely make out the thief as he chased him from the Flagler College campus through St. Augustine's Old Town, the narrow cobblestone streets, mostly empty this late on a weeknight. He had to get his book back. When he woke this morning, Jones's congestive heart failure meant he couldn't walk from one room to another without being winded. Now, running full speed didn't leave him breathing hard, and he was amazed his 70-year-old body could move with such speed and ease. The change was amazing. Jones had visited a local used bookstore just after lunch. As he looked through a couple of selections, a man entered and rushed to the back of the store. Jones was surprised to see the man wedge a book between two others, then turn and walk out. The clerk didn't look up, more focused on her phone than what happened in the store. Curious, Jones trudged to the shelf and pulled out the book. The cover was a worn brown leather, the pages inside yellowed with various symbols scrawled on them. The ink was faded and barely legible, but he understood what the book contained. A horn honked in the distance, jolting him back to the present. "Focus," he muttered, as he spotted the thief's flapping black raincoat and followed it across a wide intersection on King Street, then turned toward the Matanzas River. The clerk sold him the book, making up a price when she couldn't find one, and Jones took it to his office in the history department at Flagler College. He had studied about alchemy, but this was the first time he had seen a book in person. What he discovered inside changed everything. Not only had he healed himself, but he could do the same for his niece, confined to a wheelchair since an auto accident several years before. The fog thickened, and Jones barely made out the thief turning onto Avilés Street. He raced to the corner and rounded it, charging headlong into a group of women standing there staring at their phones. "Hey, watch where you are going," one of them snapped, the scent of gin and musky perfume filling the air. "What's with everyone running this late at night?" another one asked, as she wrapped her coat around her. "Sorry," he mumbled, pushing thin strands of silver hair out of his face. "Did you see where the other man went?" A third woman shrugged. "Just that way," she replied, and pointed down the street, her blonde hair swishing across her back. She reminded him of his niece. With no children of his own, Jones had always adored her, and as his condition worsened, they bonded over their mutual lack of mobility. With the book, he could change that. "Thanks," Jones said, as a car pulled up and the women hurried into their ride share. He raced down the street, unbuttoning his tweed jacket, his body warmed from the run through town. After a couple of blocks, he paused and listened. There was no movement down the street, and he heard no footsteps on the damp pavement. Where had the thief gone? Jones hurried past a row of small shops and restaurants, peering through each plate-glass front window. They were all dark inside, until he reached the restaurant on the corner. A light was on in the back, and he heard voices. He walked to the corner and watched a couple of kitchen workers exit from a side door. "I can't believe he sent us away before we finished cleaning," one of them said. "What if the health inspector comes first thing tomorrow?" A second man laughed. "He probably pays off the inspector. Besides, who are we to argue with the owner? Let's enjoy getting home early for once." They headed in the opposite direction, and Jones moved toward the door they had come out. Hearing more voices inside, he ducked between two large trash bins, each stuffed with garbage bags. His stomach rumbled as he smelled garlic. He realized he hadn't eaten since lunch. First, he was busy studying the alchemy formulas in the book. Then, after finding one to use for healing, he had to obtain the supplies. Using the formula took several hours. Jones, taking his time to be sure, he followed the steps precisely. The door opened, and 3 more kitchen workers exited and walked away. Jones scrambled to grab the door before it clicked shut. He paused and listened, then stuck his head in and looked around. The space was lit only by the light from an adjacent room, but he made out shelves lining the walls, each packed with cans and jars of food, while 5-gallon containers were stacked on the floor. He slipped inside, closing the door behind him, then moved near the doorway to the adjoining room. "Any trouble, Duncan?" a man's voice asked. Jones peeked around the edge of the doorframe. The room beyond was the restaurant's kitchen. Open metal shelves lined one wall, topped with a stainless counter. A double sink was at one end, while on the opposite wall was a stove and oven, its massive size meant for preparing restaurant meals. A long stainless steel table was in the center of the room. At the end nearest Jones, several dirty pieces of metal lay around a clear glass bowl. A similar bowl sat at the far end, with small glass containers around it. 2 men stood there talking. "You should have warned me that the old man was in good shape. I thought I'd never lose him," the taller of the 2 replied. Jones recognized him as the thief who had slipped into his office mere minutes ago. The man, with neatly trimmed black hair and beard, had charged across his office, grabbed the book, and run. Now he handed it to the shorter man beside him. "We'll have to rethink using that bookstore for pickups." The other man was shorter and stockier, his brown hair pulled back into a small ponytail. He opened the book and flipped through several pages, then set it on the table and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. Jones recognized him. Hector Menendez was a member of one of the oldest and wealthiest families in town. He had taken his inherited wealth and increased it, usually through illegal means, and put the profits into buying businesses around town, using them to launder money. Jones shuddered to think what Menendez was going to do with the alchemy formulas in the book. "Let us begin," Menendez said. Duncan threw his raincoat on the counter, then strode toward the storeroom. Jones backed away from the door and into the shadows. The man never entered, however. Instead, there was the tinkling of glass, then footsteps walking away. He dared to glance back into the kitchen and saw that a tray with several clear glass vials now sat on the table. "Use the acid to clean the metal while I make the philosopher's stone," Menendez said, as he picked up 2 small containers and emptied their powdery contents into the bowl in front of him. "When it is ready, we will make the gold," he added, stirring with a large glass spoon. "I received more requests for assistance today," Duncan said, as he poured the liquid from the largest vial into the bowl in front of him. "There was even one from the Middle East," he added as he took a pair of tongs and placed each piece of metal inside the bowl. The liquid released small bubbles with each addition. "Excellent," Menendez replied. "Now that we possess the book, we can make gold as often as we need to. The more who depend on us for financing, the more we control." A wave of nausea washed over Jones. Menendez was using a formula to transmute metal into gold, and based on what they had said, sell the gold to those who would use it to purchase weapons and fund terrorist operations. It was a brilliant plan, as there would be no way to trace it. "The stone is almost ready," Menendez said. "Move the book to the other end of the table." Jones could not allow them to finish. He had to do something before it was too late. Duncan walked to the far end of the table and picked up the book. Jones rushed into the room. "What the?" Duncan cried, putting the book down and throwing himself at Jones, sending them both to the ground. "Umph!" Jones cried as he landed, sandwiched between the concrete floor and the muscular body of his attacker. Duncan jumped to his feet and put a booted foot on Jones's chest. "This is the man who had the book," he told Menendez. "What should I do with him?" "We are about ready to begin the transmutation. Tie him up for now. You can deal with him later." Duncan reholstered his gun. Straddling Jones's chest, he reached down with both hands and grabbed the lapels of his tweed jacket. Jones hadn't been in a fight in decades, but without thinking, grabbed Duncan's arms, then raised his right leg and delivered a blow to the groin. As the bearded man dropped to his knees, Jones pushed him away and scrambled to his feet. Menendez grabbed a handful of knives off the counter, then turned and threw one. Jones dropped to a crouch and backed away. Menendez leaned down and sidearmed another knife under the stainless steel table, sending Jones to the floor as the blade clattered against the oven behind him. He spied a stainless steel frying pan on a low shelf. Grabbing it, he stood, using it as a shield, as another blade sailed toward him. Menendez growled as he continued to fling knives of various sizes, Jones swatting each of them away. He adjusted his stance for better balance, then felt something grab his right ankle. Duncan was on his knees, trying to pull Jones's foot out from under him. He shook and kicked his leg, but couldn't break the grasp. Menendez let out an evil laugh and launched a meat cleaver at him. Jones squatted down and used the skillet to backhand Duncan's head. The knife sailed over his position, embedding in the bearded man's chest. He gasped and collapsed to the floor, a puddle of blood forming under him. Menendez cursed and grabbed serving spoons and ladles from a canister on the counter, throwing them in Jones's direction. As he batted them away, Jones spied the bowl of acid and metal that sat on the table. Throwing it on Menendez would buy him time to take the book and run. Then what? Where could he go and not be found by Menendez and his people? Could he hide long enough to copy the formula and use it on his niece? He realized as long as the book existed, there was no way to stop Menendez from using it. Jones did not want to live in that world, and the only way to ensure he didn't was to destroy the book. He sighed, then picked up the bowl of acid and metal. He gave Menendez a long look, then poured the contents onto the open book. Steam hissed into the air, and the pages blackened as the acid was absorbed. "No!" Menendez screamed as he ran to the book, only to be driven back as the pages ignited, flames leaping from the paper. The smoke alarm screeched, activating the sprinkler system which rained water into the room. Instead of dousing the fire, however, it spread the orange and yellow flames, reducing the pages to a gray ash and charring the leather cover. Acrid smoke filled the room as Menendez swatted at the book, desperate to put out the fire, but the flames burned his flesh, and the toxic fumes sent him into a coughing fit. He made one last attempt to slam the book shut, and failed, collapsing to the floor as he gasped for air. Jones's nose and throat burned, and he pulled his jacket over his mouth and ran for the back door. Outside, he put his hands on his knees and gulped in the fresh air. In the distance, he heard sirens heading his direction. The alarm system in the restaurant must have sent the alert. He turned and ran away from the restaurant, pausing at the corner to watch a fire engine screech to a halt, firefighters grabbing hoses and running toward the building. Jones turned and headed back toward the campus, a sigh escaping his lips. A brisk walk had always helped to clear his head, something he missed as his congestive heart failure had progressed. Maybe it still worked. As he walked, he went over the steps he had taken to heal himself, surprised to find he remembered most of it. He quickened his pace, repeating the formula again and again, each time remembering more details. His walk turned to a jog as he hurried to write it down. There was still a chance his niece could be healed.